Hello, I'm Sue Miller, Director of the Susanna Wesley Foundation based at the University of Roehampton, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Sholah Steele, who's an alumna of the university and who is currently head of virtual school for the London Borough of Redbridge. And we're going to talk about her career and the values and choices that have informed her work. And I'm very much looking forward to the conversation, Sholah, and want to find more of your story. So perhaps can we just start by you telling me about your current role as head of virtual school?
Sure. I think, to be honest, a lot of people are quite curious when they hear the title virtual school, especially now with it being, kind of coming out of the pandemic. So do they think that, oh, it's something that's been set up online because of COVID? But no, not at all. We existed long before COVID and will exist a long time after COVID. So the virtual school is the name given to a statutory department. So the government have mandated it. And we manage the education of looked after children. So those are children that are in care, that are not necessarily living with their biological parents, but will have foster carers, or they might be in residential homes for a number of reasons. And so we're here to make sure that their education is a top priority, irrespective of what's going on in their home life. So that's what the virtual school does.
Fascinating. And I suppose perhaps you can say what has led you into this particular job, and what has led up to it.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, it's been a bit of a happy coincidence. I think that, the virtual school is not necessarily a department that one, starts their career thinking that they're going to end up in, or, think, oh yeah, let me go and align myself with the virtual school. But it's the type of role that utilizes a variety of experiences. And that's why I think I'm pretty well suited to it. So I actually, before becoming the head, I was the lead officer, so essentially the deputy. But before that, I'd always worked in education, not necessarily with vulnerable children, but with who I like to call my big kids, so university-age children. And I did actually start my career in primary school. So, I've had the little bobbers as well.
So how far do you, well, perhaps you can tell us a bit about the different jobs that you've had over your career, because you've had some quite varied jobs, I think.
Yeah.
University career fitted into that as well.
Yeah, no, of course. So as I just mentioned, I did start off as a teaching assistant in a primary school. And I think that's good because it gets used to early mornings and preparation and really understanding, I guess, the crux of education and where it starts for children. So that was an invaluable experience. I actually retained that job whilst going to university. So I started off doing that, and then I decided actually I did want to pursue an undergraduate career, not in teaching actually, even though it was offered to me at the time. Though I loved working in a school, I didn't necessarily see myself teaching long term, but I still wanted to be in the education space. So I was able to still be a TA while starting my undergraduate degree at Roehampton, which was a combined degree. So I did theology and religious studies and media and culture, because whilst I did have, a real interest in education, I had also come from a bit of a creative background. So in my teens, I was very musical. So I felt that it was really beneficial to, I guess, do the combined honours so that I had the media and culture should I, end up pursuing a career that way. But I also had the religious studies and theology should I decide to go into teaching, because I thought, oh, actually, yeah, I would love to be an RE teacher. So I tried to give myself options, and thankfully, I think Roehampton really was the perfect place to do my degree, because they had that options and they facilitated my timetable wonderfully. So yeah, really thankful that I had the opportunity to study there.
Thank you for that plug for Roehampton.
It's genuine. I haven't been paid. It really is genuine.
And you did go on to do a master's, didn't you?
Yes. They couldn't keep me away. Funnily enough, I think when you're a youngster, you can't wait to finish your undergraduate degree. But then I actually found that I really missed learning and studying and essay writing. Yeah, I know, believe it or not. And at that time, actually, it's worth noting, I had stepped out of teaching because To be honest, I needed more money, and a teaching assistant isn't the most generous of salary. So I did move into the corporate sphere. So I was doing some administration for an HR company, which did afford me some more money. However, you know, again, I think a lot of people do start, you know, their corporate career, so to speak, in administration, and you know, it doesn't feel very inspiring at the time, quite frankly. So right, I'm going to pursue my master's. So I did so. And unfortunately, whilst I thought that I'd be able to work and study at the same time, it transpired that I couldn't. They weren't willing to, you know, give me the day release to go to university. So, you know, that was a really hard decision at that point, because I had a mortgage. And so I had to think, you know, is it worth actually pursuing this master's and actually leaving my job with no certainty of what I was going to go on to? But I did make the decision to leave the job and to pursue my master's. Call it faith, perhaps, I don't know. But yeah, it was definitely the right call in the end.
Yeah. So and during that period, you worked a little bit for the Susanna Wesley.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So again, you know, and I really do think back at my time at Roehampton fondly. I really do. So I mean, all jokes aside about the plug, it really is a wonderful place with wonderful people. And yes, I did manage to work a bit for the Susanna Wesley Foundation, which was such a huge opportunity. So grateful. So I was able to study and work alongside and meet again some wonderful, inspiring people alongside it. So that worked out really, really well. Even though it seemed like a really daunting decision to make at the time, you know, do I leave my job and pursue studying with kind of nothing at that time to go to?
Yeah, so it's encouraging, I think, for others to hear about the idea of making those sorts of choices and knowing where things are leading. So in terms of the sorts of your trajectory is an interesting one. What sort of beliefs or values or principles have actually informed your work and your choices, would you say?
So it probably sounds really cliche, but I try to be a decent person. And I think I, you know, have always pursued roles or organizations that subscribe to that. So being a good person, not depleting the world. I would definitely credit my parents in terms of them trying to instill in all of their children, you know, try and leave the world a bit of a better place than when you entered it. So that tends to be my guiding principle, so to speak. And so I probably definitely lean towards jobs and organizations that help people, or that, you know, have the capacity to help people in some way, as opposed to not. So hence why, you know, I've wanted to work with young people, and think, because I'm hoping that, you know, if they come across a positive person earlier in their career, then, you know, I know it can make such a change, as I've experienced throughout my career as well, and being in really inspirational organizations. So that tends to be the principle and belief that I go by. I try and leave the world a bit of a better place than when you came in.
So the current job you're in is an interesting one in terms of, it's an unusual role, I think, or one that perhaps not all of us are terribly aware of the existence of. I don't want to talk for the people who are watching. And can you tell us a bit about, you know, what is meaningful about this job, and what gives you purpose in what you're doing in the current role?
No, sure. I always describe my job as a privilege and an honor, because it gives me the opportunity to advocate for young people that can't do it themselves, and also advocate for parents that can't do it themselves. You know, I think it's definitely worth mentioning that it can be a really emotional role, and definitely when I started, I struggled with the emotional side, because, you know, I am privy to really confidential information about people's history and their background and what they've been through. And it definitely affects you just as a person, irrespective of whether you've met the young person or met the parents. It does affect you as a person. So I think to be trusted with that information, and then you know, have to really try your best to improve the outcomes of that young person, I honestly do see as a privilege, but also a huge responsibility. And I think what's important about the role as well is not being judgmental, because as I said, though you have knowledge of what people have been through, and obviously, you know, they're not good experiences by and large, you have to separate yourself, because you know nobody knows anybody's full life history, and you're there to carry out a function. So I find that really meaningful, to be able to, I guess, use my positive life experience to hopefully better those outcomes and aspirations and future careers of our young people in Redbridge. So yeah.
And what sort of gifts and skills do you bring? Do you think the job involves that you have to bring to it?
That's a really interesting question.
I
think you have to be empathetic. Again, I think you really do have to be an advocate and non-judgmental, only because you know, as I said, I can give, you know, very broad examples. You know, we have young people that are, say, 14, 15, who have missed quite a lot of school, and so are not really interested in conforming to a school day or school uniform. They've picked up, you know, unfortunate habits such as smoking or vaping. And then when I then have to approach a school and say, well, look, you know, I have this little Johnny. I don't have current levels for him, unfortunately, because, you know, he's missed quite a lot of school. He doesn't quite like to wear Clark's shoes to school either. So, you know, might be lucky if we get black Nike trainers. He might also need a break for vaping. That doesn't sound attractive to any school, and I can understand that. However, it's my job to make sure that I do get him the best opportunity in schools, and that, you know, work is differentiated so that he can access it, and so that he doesn't feel overwhelmed when he goes into an academic environment. So it's taking all of those things into consideration, whilst, you know, being professional, but also, yeah, sympathetic to the school as well, because I'm not there to fight with schools. I understand they have to educate and safeguard numerous children. So, you know, it's really understanding both sides of the coin, hence why I said empathy is, I think, the first skill. You have to be confident, actually, because sometimes, you know, some of these situations can be quite daunting, but you have to stand your ground. I think you have to be articulate as well, because sometimes you have to write not the most pleasant emails, but get your point across for your young person. So yeah, I'd probably say empathy, articulation, confidence. Yeah, those are probably some of the key skills that you need to run a virtual school.
That's an interesting set of skills and gifts that you mentioned in relation to the role that you're doing. I mean, it's interesting that you didn't do a teacher training course and decided against that. And how does that play into the role that you're performing at the moment?
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting comment, Sue. Well, typically virtual heads, they can be called virtual head teachers, so it is expected that you'd come from a teaching background. And, you know, I'll be honest, I think when I initially got the role, I did feel, you know, a slight sense of imposter syndrome, because I didn't have the qualification, and I felt, well, you know, will I be judged because I don't have the qualification? However, I think having worked in schools, having worked in higher education, as I said, that cumulative experience has enabled me to fulfill the role successfully, quite frankly. So, you know, and I think actually it's probably quite heartening that, you know, you don't just need a piece of paper to fulfill a role. Actually, you know, it sounds, again, cliche, but, you know, experience does count for a lot. And it really has done in my case. So, you know, it's definitely worth noting that even if you don't have a teaching qualification and you still want to progress in education, you can, because, as I said, having worked in schools, having worked in universities for a number of years, and also I will definitely say that, you know, having a solid education behind me as well, my master's really has been invaluable, has definitely enabled me to, I would say, fulfill the role of the virtual head for the past year and a half. So yes, I think skills and experience count for the most, which has definitely been the case for me.
So yes, I mean, there are different ways of getting to a point, aren't there, which I think is quite reassuring for people when they're thinking about planning their career and seeing what direction they're going in. Can you just say very briefly what masters it was you did? I don't think we mentioned that earlier.
Oh, no. So it was in human rights and international relations. And, funnily enough, I mean, people tend to, I think, associate human rights with law. But as I said, having the advocating side of my role has really lent into my master's, because that's, I did so much advocacy in that role. You learn about campaigning, about those who've been through adverse experiences, and it was almost a full circle moment. Yes, fair enough, you learn it on an international scale as opposed to a local scale, but actually my role is very much about that. About people who have had adverse experiences and campaigning on their behalf. So I feel so lucky to be able to use my master's, even though it might not have been the way I thought it would initially. But no, it's absolutely invaluable.
So, sorry.
No, go.
So it's worth looking for the principles that you can learn from one thing and applying into something else.
Absolutely. Again, it sounds like, transferable skills, but they are real. They are real.
Yes, it's nice to hear. So if you were going about your career again, I mean, we've still got plenty of career ahead of you, I know, but is there anything that you would do differently?
So I think we touched on it before. I think, sometimes not every opportunity is a good opportunity, and not all employment is good employment. And, as I said, I can definitely understand we all have responsibilities, and sometimes you do need to take a job to pay the bills. However, having confidence in yourself and belief in yourself that actually you can afford to take a calculated risk at some point, for a better future is really worth noting, because I think sometimes if you're unhappy in employment, you can really get stuck in a rut, and it can really affect your mental health, actually, and sometimes it can be hard to see the bigger picture, hence why, as I said, I have stepped away from, I guess, seemingly good opportunities, but it's because of the longer goal, actually. And ultimately, I think your happiness and your mental health is more important than any seemingly great employment opportunity. So in terms of doing things differently, yeah, I probably would say just having a bit more belief in myself, actually, to make those moves slightly earlier, as opposed to waiting it out, as long as I did in some cases. And I wouldn't say, that there were many of those instances, but definitely a couple that I can draw on. So yeah, it's just having that belief, I think, moving forward.
Yeah. And I mean, I suppose this relates. A question I had in mind was about walking away from a seeming opportunity. Are there any things that, it relates to what you've just said, but are there any other examples where you really felt that this could have been an opportunity, that there's something about it, the nature of it, which just didn't feel right for you?
Yeah, no, sure. So I think it was a few years back, so before I was at Redbridge, I had decided that, I did want to be based a bit closer to home, and probably, traveling into central London. I have a small child, he was even younger at the time, I think 1 or 2, and so I didn't necessarily want to have to make that commute and quickly rush to pick him up at nursery, and if the tubes go haywire, then you're stuck. So taking all of those things into consideration, I thought, actually, I probably will step out of the central London arena for a while. However, I had signed up with a recruitment agency, as one does, and they found this opportunity with a slightly smaller university who were developing their international program. Oh my gosh, that sounds perfect. I've been in higher education for years. As I said, I've got my master's in human rights and international relations, so I'm used to dealing with international students. So developing their experience in London, I'm a people's person. So that sounded like literally the perfect opportunity. I thought, well, let me go along for the interview. I did. I was successful. Again, it wasn't what I was looking for at the moment, because, as I said, I didn't want to travel into central London or anything like that. However, it kind of landed in my lap. So I thought, well, why not? The salary was favourable. They offered me more money than was advertised. So it seemed like happy days. Why wouldn't you take it? And I did take it because, I am a practical Annie. As I said, I've had a mortgage forever and now child to support. So, hey, why not take an opportunity that's fallen into your lap? However, not long into the role, I realized that, I had obviously come to the conclusion about commuting for a reason. And it wasn't just commuting. I think over my career, what I realized is that I like quite large established organizations. I really like an infrastructure. I like there to be, solid and bona fide departments that you can go to, so you have your HR department, you also have, your kind of extracurricular things, your committees or your networks that you can tap into. And I think it's really, really important actually to understand the type of working environment you like. It comes back to trying to have that belief as well. And that belief can come in many forms. It can come in, a religious faith. It can come in, faith in the universe or internal belief. So it can come from different places.
But worth cultivating, actually. Yeah.
I would say so.
I think you provided, Sholah, some wonderful, or a wonderful example of how you can steer a career, how you can navigate a way to create a path for yourself. Perhaps you can say a bit more about what you would have learned from that.
Yeah, sure. I think it's really worth noting that, obviously once you finish your undergraduate degree or even, postgraduate degree, you don't necessarily have all the answers or know exactly what, you want your career to look like. But it's worth definitely taking some time to think, broadly, or have a rough idea of what you'd like to experience, what you'd like to achieve throughout your career, and use that as your initial steps to steer your career. As I said, it's, even though I have taken risks, they have to be calculated risks because, as I said, we all have responsibilities. So it's, not about necessarily just leaving a job or leaving a role, on a whim because you don't feel like it. I think in that sense, you do have to make quite a calculated decision at some point. And though, you might not be in the highest positions within an organization, especially when you're starting out. And even though you might not feel that you have complete control, you still do have an element of control over your life and your career and your decisions to make some initial steps to steering it in the path that you'd like to. I think it's definitely worth noting as well that in order to progress, which we all want to do quite naturally, you don't have to move from organization to organization. As I mentioned previously, I like being in quite big organizations because I think part of that is having opportunities. There are different departments that you might think, oh, in a few years, after I've gained some more experience, I might want to, see if there's an opportunity there. So I think it's definitely worth noting that, a good organization can really, really help shape your career, shape yourself as a person and your development. So it's just establishing what you want from your career and trying to align those opportunities where you can, really.
Well, thank you, Sholah, very much for providing your set of examples, which I think are really instructive. And it's lovely to hear about what you're doing now, having worked with you some time ago now. And we wish you every success as you move forward, and every success for the virtual school, which really sounds a fascinating and very important organisation. So thank you, Sholah.
Oh, thanks so much, Sue.